Welcome back. Tonight we're going to travel a very long way back in time to a sunlit town on the coast of Italy almost 2,000 years ago, a place called Pompeii. There's a whole world waiting there, of ordinary people and quiet streets, and one famous, fateful day. I'll tell it to you slowly, gently, from the very beginning. So get comfortable, settle in, and let your body grow heavy and still. You don't have to stay awake for any of it. I'll keep the story going while you drift. Chapter 1. The Bay Before the City. Let's begin gently. Long before there was any town here at all, on a beautiful curve of coast in the south of Italy. If you could float high above the land and look down, you would see a wide and lovely bay, a great blue scoop of the Mediterranean Sea pressing into the Italian coast. We call it the Bay of Naples now. It is one of the most beautiful places in the whole of Italy, and it has been beautiful for far longer than anyone has been there to say so. The water is deep and blue and warm, sheltered by the curve of the land. The light here is soft and golden, the kind of light that painters and poets have loved for thousands of years. And the land that rises up from the shore is rich, astonishingly rich, some of the most fertile soil anywhere in the ancient world. That richness was a gift, though the people who first farmed it did not understand where the gift had come from. The soil of this bay is so good because of the mountain that stands behind it, a great green mountain rising up from the plain, its slopes covered in vineyards and orchards and farms. The people who lived here in the early days saw only a tall, kindly mountain, generous with its fertile earth, clothed in vines that gave wonderful wine. They did not know, because there was no way for them to know, that this mountain was a sleeping volcano, and that the very richness of their fields, the soil that made them prosperous, was made of the ash of its ancient eruptions, long, long before any of them were born. The mountain had given them everything, and one day, far in their future, it would ask for it all back. But that day was a long way off, and we are in no hurry to reach it. Let the mountain sleep a while. It had slept for centuries already. There is a deep patience in a mountain like that, a patience measured not in years or lifetimes, but in ages, in spans of time so long that whole peoples can rise and live and be forgotten within a single one of the mountain's slow breaths. To the people who farmed its slopes, the mountain was simply eternal, simply there, as unchanging as the sea or the sky. Their great-grandparents had known it green and quiet. Their great-grandchildren would know it green and quiet too, they assumed, for the mountain had always been green and quiet, as far back as any story reached. They could not feel the slow, deep stirrings far beneath it, the patient gathering of forces in the dark roots of the earth, because those things move on a timescale that no human life is long enough to notice. And so they loved the mountain without fear, planted their vines on it, built their homes upon it, drank the wine its slopes gave them, and never once imagined that the green and generous giant at their backs was anything other than the kindly, permanent feature of their world it had always seemed to be. So picture this coast in the very early days, before Pompeii was Pompeii. The blue bay, the green mountain, the warm light. Fishing boats drawn up on the shore. Small farms scattered across the fertile plain, their fields heavy with grain and grapes and olives. The sea breeze coming in off the water in the afternoon. The whole place soft and golden and abundant. A land that gave generously to anyone who worked it, watched over by its great, quiet mountain. People had been drawn to this rich and beautiful coast for a very long time. In the centuries before Rome rose to greatness, this part of Italy was a meeting place of peoples. There were the local Italian tribes, the Oscans, who farmed the land and built the first small settlements. There were the Greeks, those great seafarers and traders and colonists who had sailed across the Mediterranean and planted cities all along these coasts, bringing their gods and their art and their alphabet and their ways. There were the Etruscans, the mysterious and sophisticated people of central Italy, whose influence reached down into this region. All of them passed through, settled, traded, mingled, left their mark on the land and on each other. And out of all that mingling, on a low rise near the mouth of a small river, near the shore of the beautiful bay, in the shadow of the great green mountain, a town began to grow. They called it Pompeii. It's worth pausing on how alive this whole coast was in those early centuries, how much came and went across these blue waters. The Greeks especially loved this bay. They founded a great city not far away, and the whole region became so thoroughly settled by Greeks and so steeped in their culture that the Romans would later call this part of Italy by a name that meant, more or less, Greater Greece. So the little town that became Pompeii grew up in a cultured and connected world, not some lonely frontier, but a busy crossroads of the ancient Mediterranean, where ships came and went, where goods and ideas and gods flowed back and forth across the water, where the art of the Greeks and the skill of the Etruscans and the practical earthiness of the Italian farmers all met and mingled. The wine and oil of these fertile fields went out across the sea, and in came the goods and the influences of distant places. From its very beginnings, Pompeii was a place of trade and mixture and exchange, open to the world, enriched by it. We are not entirely sure what the name meant, or exactly when the first stones were laid. The beginnings of Pompeii are lost in the deep past, the way the beginnings of most ancient towns are lost. But by around 2,500 years ago, it was there, a real settlement, a walled town on its little rise above the plain, looking out over the fertile fields toward the sea on one side and up at the looming mountain on the other. Small at first, modest, a place of farmers and fishermen and traders, living off the richness of the land and the bounty of the sea, going about their lives under the southern sun. It's a peaceful picture, isn't it? A small, ancient town in a beautiful and generous land. Hold on to it, because Pompeii is going to grow into something much grander, and then it is going to meet its famous and terrible day. But all of that is still far ahead. For now, just let the little town sit there in the early sunlight, on its rise above the plain, by the blue bay, beneath the green and patient mountain, going quietly about the business of being alive, with no idea at all of the strange immortality that waited for it far in its future. None of them knew. They simply lived. Let them live a while, in the peace of the beginning, before any of the rest of it comes.
Chapter 2. A town becomes Roman. For a long time, Pompeii was its own small place, shaped by all those peoples who had passed through and settled this coast. It grew slowly the way ancient towns grew, gathering buildings and walls and temples and people over the generations. It was a town of the Oscan people for much of its early life, with its own language and its own ways, touched by Greek culture from the colonies nearby and by the Etruscans from the north. It was prosperous, in a modest way, living off its rich fields and its position near the sea, trading its wine and its oil and its produce. It built itself a ring of walls and gates, and the beginnings of the public buildings that any self-respecting town of the ancient Mediterranean would want. But to the north a new power was rising, one that would in time swallow up Pompeii and all the rest of Italy, and far, far more besides. Power was Rome. Rome began as just one more town among many in central Italy, but it grew and conquered and grew again, spreading its control outward across the Italian peninsula over the centuries, absorbing one people after another until at last it reached down into this rich southern region. Pompeii's path into the Roman world was not entirely smooth. At one point, during a great war in which many of the towns of Italy rose up against Rome to demand the rights of Roman citizenship. Pompey took the losing side. Roman general besieged the town. You can still see, to this day, the marks on Pompeii's walls where Roman siege weapons struck them, scars from a war fought more than 2,000 years ago, still visible in the old stone. It's a strange and moving thing, those marks on the walls, long before the famous catastrophe, long before the mountain woke. The town already had its history of trouble and survival, written into its very stones. The people of that earlier age had stood on those walls and defended their town, and lost, and then gone on living, becoming Roman, prospering, raising the generations that would, much later, meet the mountain. The walls remember it all, the siege and the surrender, and the long peace that followed. The whole layered history of a town that, like all towns, had seen hard times before its hardest time, and had come through them, and gone on. There is something steadying in that, in remembering that Pompeii was not only the town of its famous ending, but a real place with a long and varied past, that endured a war and recovered, changed hands, and changed its very identity, and carried on. That had already lived several different lives before the one we remember best.
But that was the way of it with Rome. You might resist and lose, but then you were brought into the Roman world, and in time you became Roman yourself. And so it was with Pompeii. After that war, Rome settled a colony of its own veterans, retired soldiers, in the town, and Pompeii became a Roman town, a colony of Rome, its people Roman citizens, its language now Latin, its life reshaped along Roman lines. And rather than diminishing it, becoming Roman was the making of Pompeii. Under Rome, in the peace and prosperity that Roman rule brought to this corner of the world, the town flourished as never before. This was the great age of Pompeii, the couple of centuries when it became the lively, prosperous, comfortable Roman town whose memory we keep today. The peace that Rome imposed across its growing empire, the long stretch of relative calm that historians call the Roman peace, allowed trade to flow and towns to grow rich. And Pompeii, with its fertile fields, its wine, its position on the bay, its busy little port nearby, did very well indeed. It became a bustling provincial town of perhaps 10 or 20,000 people. No one is quite sure of the number, full of merchants and craftsmen, and farmers and slaves, and freed slaves, and wealthy families, and ordinary working people. All the rich human mixture of a Roman town going about its business. It was, by the standards of the ancient world, a good place to live, and a fortunate one. It was not a great capital, not a centre of power, or a place where history's grand events unfolded. It was something better for those who lived there. A comfortable, prosperous, ordinary town, far enough from the great struggles of the age to enjoy the long peace, rich enough from its trade and its land to support a pleasant life, blessed with a beautiful setting and a kindly climate and a fertile countryside. The people of such a town could expect to live their lives in relative security and comfort, to ply their trades and raise their families and enjoy the baths and the games and the festivals, to grow old, if they were lucky, in the same streets where they had grown up. There were the usual troubles of any human place, the inequalities, the hardships of the poor and the enslaved, the ordinary sorrows and struggles of life. But on the whole, in its golden years, Pompeii was about as good a place as the ancient world had to offer for an ordinary person to live an ordinary life. And that, in the end, is what makes its story so resonant. It was not exceptional, and that is exactly why it speaks to us, because most of us, too, live ordinary lives in ordinary places. And in Pompeii, we see those ordinary lives made, by chance and catastrophe and time, unexpectedly eternal. The wealthy families of Pompeii built themselves grand houses, beautiful homes arranged around open courtyards and gardens, decorated with painted walls and mosaic floors and fountains. The town built itself all the things a proper Roman town should have. A forum, the great open public square at the heart of the town, lined with temples and public buildings, the centre of business and religion and civic life. Temples to the Roman gods. Public baths, those wonderful Roman institutions where people went not just to wash, but to relax and socialise and pass the time. A theatre for plays, and a smaller, covered theatre for music and poetry. And on the edge of town, a great amphitheatre, one of the oldest of its kind anywhere in the Roman world, where the people gathered to watch the games. The streets filled with shops and workshops and taverns and bakeries, the walls filled with painted signs and notices and the scrawled graffiti of ordinary people. The houses filled with families, and over it all the warm southern sun, the blue bay nearby, and the great green mountain rising behind, its slopes covered in the vineyards that gave Pompeii some of its famous wine, still sleeping, still patient, still giving no sign at all of what it truly was. By the time of its golden years, Pompeii had become a thoroughly Roman town, but one that still carried, in its stones and its streets and its mixture of peoples, the long layered history that had made it. There were older temples from its pre-Roman days, and newer ones in the Roman style. There were old Oscan inscriptions alongside the Latin. The town had absorbed Greek and Etruscan and Italian and Roman influences over the centuries, and blended them all into something that was distinctly itself. A particular place with a particular character, not just any Roman town, but Pompeii, with its own look and feel and history, its own local gods and local heroes and local pride. It had its rivalries with neighbouring towns, its local politics, its local customs and festivals. It was a real and particular community, rooted in its place, shaped by its long past, going about its life with all the specific texture of a real town that has been somewhere a long time. And it was prosperous and comfortable and at peace, in the long calm of the Roman world, with no reason at all to think that its pleasant, ordinary existence would not simply continue year after year, generation after generation, indefinitely into the future. Let's go down into that town now, in its golden years, and walk its streets, and see how its people lived. Because the most wonderful thing about Pompeii, the reason it matters so much to us, is not how it ended. It is how vividly we can still see how it lived. So let's go and live in it a while. Chapter 3. A Walk Through the City. Come and walk with me through Pompeii on an ordinary day in its golden years, and let me show you the town as its people knew it. We can take our time. There is no hurry anywhere in this story tonight. We come in through one of the town gates, through the thick stone walls, and step onto a street. And the first thing to notice is that the street is paved with great blocks of hard grey stone, worn smooth and rutted with the deep grooves left by the wheels of countless carts over the years. The streets of Pompeii are narrow, and they run in a fairly neat grid, the way Roman town planners liked them, crossing each other at tidy corners. Set into the roadway at the crossings are large stepping stones, raised blocks that let people cross the street without stepping down into it, because the streets doubled as drains and could run with water and waste, and the gaps between the stepping stones were spaced just so to let the cartwheels pass through. Small, practical cleverness, 2,000 years old, still sitting there in the stone. Stand a moment and just take in the street, because there is so much life in it. The fronts of the buildings rise on either side, and at intervals there are fountains, public fountains where the people of the neighbourhood came to draw their water, fed by the town's water system, a great stone basin with a spout, the stone worn smooth by countless hands resting on it as people leaned in to fill their jars. The water ran day and night, and the sound of it would have been part of the music of the street, the splash and trickle at every few corners. There were street shrines too, little painted niches on the corners of buildings, where the spirits that guarded the crossroads and the neighbourhood were honoured, sometimes with a fresh garland or a small offering left by a passing local. And everywhere, the painted walls, the signs and notices, and the endless graffiti, so that the very surfaces of the street spoke, advertised, argued, joked, and remembered. Along the street rise the walls of the buildings, mostly 2 stories, built of stone and brick and covered in plaster. At street level, opening right onto the road, are the shops and workshops, their wide doorways open to the world. Here is a bakery, and you can smell the bread and see the great round millstones where grain was ground, turned by donkeys or by slaves, and the domed oven, much like a pizza oven, where the loaves were baked. In fact, archaeologists found in one Pompeii bakery loaves of bread still in the oven, baked on that last day and never collected, preserved for nearly 2,000 years. But we are not at the last day. We are in the golden years, and the bread is fresh, and the baker is selling it warm to the people of the street. The bakeries of Pompeii were busy places, and there were many of them, for bread was the staple of the Roman diet, the thing everyone ate every day. In the back, the great cone-shaped millstones of volcanic rock ground the grain into flour, turned round and round, hour after hour, by patient blindfolded donkeys or by the labour of enslaved workers. The dough was mixed and kneaded and shaped into round, flat loaves, often scored into segments so they could be broken apart easily, and slid into the domed brick oven to bake. The smell of it must have been one of the constant pleasures of the Pompeii streets, the warm, yeasty smell of baking bread drifting out of the bakeries morning after morning, drawing people in to buy their daily loaves, still warm from the oven. It is one of the most homely and human things imaginable, and it was happening here, on these streets, every single day, for hundreds of years. Here is a tavern, a little bar opening onto the street, with a stone counter set with great jars sunk into it, holding wine and hot food, where working people stopped to eat and drink, much as we might stop at a cafe today. Pompeii had many of these, dotted all through the town, and on their walls you can still sometimes read the painted lists of what they sold, and the scratched graffiti of the customers, complaining about the wine, or boasting, or recording a name, or a love, or a joke. These little taverns were the gathering places of ordinary working Pompeii, where a labourer or a craftsman could get a cup of wine and a bite of hot food without going home, where people met and talked and passed the time, where the gossip and the news of the neighbourhood flowed along with the wine. Some had a few rooms in back or upstairs. Some were simple counters open to the street. All of them were full of the ordinary social life of the town, the talk and the laughter and the small daily human exchanges that make up the texture of life in any place, in any age. Here is a workshop where cloth was made or cleaned, a fullery, where they treated wool and laundered togas in great vats. Here is a shop selling oil or pottery, or the garlic and onions and produce of the rich surrounding farms. And here, set back behind a modest doorway, is one of the fine houses of Pompeii. And let's step inside, because the homes of this town are among the most wonderful things it left us. From the street, the house seems to turn its back on the world, presenting only a plain wall and a door. But step through the entrance passage and the house opens up around you, inward-facing, private, built around the light and air of open spaces. First comes the atrium, a high central hall open to the sky in the middle, with a shallow pool set in the floor below the opening to catch the rainwater. The light falls down through that opening into the cool of the hall. Around the atrium are the rooms of the house, bedrooms and sitting rooms, and the formal room where the master of the house received his visitors and conducted his business. And beyond, often, is the most beautiful part of all, the peristyle, an open garden courtyard surrounded by a covered walkway held up by columns. Here, the wealthy of Pompeii made small private paradises, gardens planted with flowers and shrubs and shade trees, decorated with fountains and statues and pools, painted on their surrounding walls with images of even more gardens, so that the painted greenery and the real greenery blended together, and the whole space became a cool, green, peaceful retreat from the heat and noise of the town. The walls of these houses were painted, gloriously painted, in rich reds and golds and blues and greens, with scenes from mythology, with landscapes, with delicate decorations, with images so fresh and so skillful that when they were uncovered nearly 2,000 years later, the colours still glowed. The floors were laid with mosaics, tiny pieces of coloured stone set into patterns and pictures, some of them masterpieces of art. At the entrance of one house, set into the floor, is a famous mosaic of a dog, with the warning words in Latin, "Beware of the dog." A little joke, a little household pride, 2,000 years old, still there in the floor where the family laid it. Imagine being a guest in such a house, arriving from the dust and bustle of the street, stepping through the plain doorway and finding yourself in this cool, ordered, beautiful private world. The light falling softly from the opening above the atrium, glinting on the water in the pool below. The painted walls glowing around you, deep Pompeian red, that famous rich red the town is known for, panels of it framing delicate scenes and figures. The mosaic floors beneath your feet, intricate and fine, and then, drawing you onward, the green of the garden at the heart of the house, the splash of a fountain, the scent of flowers, the dapple of sunlight through the leaves of the courtyard, birdsong perhaps, and the murmur of the household going about its day. These houses were designed to soothe, to delight, to create a haven of beauty and calm, shut away from the world outside, and they did it beautifully, with an artistry that still takes the breath away 2,000 years later. To live in such a house, surrounded by such beauty, must have been one of the great pleasures available to anyone in the ancient world. This was how the comfortable people of Pompeii lived, in these beautiful, inward-turning houses full of light and colour and green garden courtyards, with their painted walls and their mosaic floors and their household shrines where they honoured the spirits that protected the home. Not everyone lived like this, of course. Most people lived far more simply, in small apartments and rooms above the shops, or in the crowded quarters of the working poor, or in the slave quarters of the great houses. Pompeii, like every Roman town, was built on a steep ladder of wealth and status, from the rich families at the top, down through the craftsmen and shopkeepers to the poor, and finally to the enslaved, who did so much of the labour and had so little of the comfort. We should remember them too, all through this story, the people whose names and lives the records mostly do not keep, but who were there, who built the walls and ground the grain and carried the water and made the whole town run. Slavery was woven all through the Roman world, and Pompeii was no exception. The enslaved people of the town did an enormous share of its labour, in the houses and the workshops and the bakeries and the fields, the cooking and cleaning and carrying, the heavy grinding work, the 1,000 daily tasks that kept a Roman household and a Roman town functioning. Some were treated harshly, some more kindly. Some were able in time to earn or be granted their freedom and go on to make lives and even fortunes of their own. For the Roman world, for all its cruelty, did allow that path upward, and freed slaves and their descendants became an important part of the town's life. But for most of the enslaved, life was hard and unfree, their labour taken, their names mostly unrecorded, their stories largely lost to us. It is right to hold them in mind as we walk through this beautiful town, to remember that the comfort and the beauty rested on their unseen labour, and that they too were people, with their own hopes and griefs and inner lives, as real as anyone, however little the records kept of them. They were here, in their thousands, part of the living town, and they deserve to be remembered along with all the rest. But rich or poor, free or enslaved, all of them lived their lives in this same town, under the same sun, along these same paved streets, in the shadow of the same green mountain. Let's walk a little further through it and see the great public places where all of Pompeii came together. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Town. At the centre of Pompeii, as at the centre of every Roman town, was the Forum, and let's walk there now, into the great open space that was the beating heart of the whole community. The Forum was a large rectangular plaza, paved and open, surrounded by the most important buildings in town. It was closed to carts, a space for people on foot, for gathering and talking and doing business and worshipping and simply being together. Picture it busy on a market morning, full of people, the citizens of Pompeii in their tunics and togas, merchants and farmers, men and women, the wealthy and the humble, all moving through the great square under the southern sun, with the green mass of the mountain rising beyond the rooftops at one end. The Forum was the place where the whole life of the town came together and showed itself. Here the news was heard and spread, here friends met and strangers passed. Here the business of the town was done, deals made, contracts agreed, money changed and lent. Here the great public announcements were made, and the elections fought, and the festivals celebrated. Statues of important men and emperors and gods stood about the square, raised on their pedestals, looking down on the daily bustle. Around the edges, colonnades gave shade from the sun, walkways lined with columns where people could stroll and talk out of the heat. It was the living room of the whole community, the one place where every kind of Pompeian, rich and poor, free and enslaved, citizen and visitor, moved through the same space and shared, for a while, the same ground. To stand in the Forum was to stand at the very centre of the town's life, with everything that mattered to Pompeii gathered around you, and the mountain watching over it all from beyond the rooftops. Around the Forum stood the temples. At one end, raised up on a high platform with steps leading up to it, was the temple of Jupiter, the chief god of the Romans, looking out over the whole square, with the mountain framed behind it. There were temples to other gods as well, to Apollo with its bronze statues, and shrines to the household and civic gods that the Romans honoured in every part of their lives. Religion for the Romans was woven through everything, public and private, a constant tending of the relationship between the people and the many gods who watched over the town, the harvest, the home, the dead. The Pompeians made their offerings and their prayers, kept their festivals, honoured their gods, and felt, no doubt, that in doing so they kept their world safe and in order. The gods of Pompeii were many, and they were everywhere, not shut away in temples, but present in every part of daily life. Every home had its household shrine, a little niche where the family honoured the spirits that guarded the house and the ancestors who had gone before, making small daily offerings, a few grains, a little wine, a prayer. The crossroads had their guardian spirits, the trades had their patron gods. There were the great gods of Rome, Jupiter and Juno and Minerva and Apollo and Venus, who was held in special honour here, and there were also gods brought from far across the empire, for Rome was a world of many peoples and many faiths, and the worship of gods from distant Egypt and the East had found its way to Pompeii too, with its own temple and its own devoted followers. The Pompeians were, on the whole, easy and inclusive in their religion, ready to honour many gods, to add new ones, to seek favour and protection wherever it might be found. Their faith was less about belief than about practice, about the careful keeping up of the proper rituals and offerings that maintained the right relationship between the human world and the divine, and so kept the world turning as it should. There is something poignant in that now, knowing what we know. They tended their gods so carefully, made their offerings, kept their festivals, prayed for protection and prosperity, and felt themselves watched over and secure. And the one force that would actually decide their fate, the fire deep beneath their beloved mountain, was not among the gods they knew to pray to, was not understood by them at all. But we should not feel superior in this. They did their best with the understanding they had, as we all do, and their devotion, their sense of living in a world full of presences to be honoured and thanked, gave their lives a richness and a meaning that was real, whatever the truth of the gods they served. They lived gracefully, with reverence and gratitude woven through their days. That is no small thing. Around the forum, too, stood the buildings of business and government. There was the basilica, a great roofed hall that served as the town's law court and a centre of commerce, where legal cases were heard and deals were struck. There were the offices of the town's officials, the men elected to run Pompeii's affairs, for, like all Roman towns, it governed much of its own local life, with elections and magistrates and all the machinery of civic politics. The walls of Pompeii are covered, even now, with election notices, painted slogans urging the citizens to vote for this candidate or that, recommending them as good and honest men. The political advertising of 2,000 years ago, still legible on the plaster. There was a market building for food, and a hall for the cloth merchants, and a public weights and measures table cut from stone, so that buyers could check they were not being cheated. The whole apparatus of a busy, self-governing commercial little town gathered around its central square. Those election notices are one of the most charming things the town preserved, because they are so completely familiar. The candidates ran for the local offices, the magistracies that managed the town's affairs, and their supporters painted endorsements of them all over the walls, just as political signs cover a town today at election time. This neighbourhood backs this candidate. The mule drivers recommend this one. The bakers support that one. Vote for him, he is a worthy man. Some of the notices are earnest, some are clearly tongue-in-cheek, supposed endorsements from groups of layabouts or petty thieves meant as a joke at a candidate's expense. It is local democracy in all its colour and pettiness and humour, painted on the walls of a town 2,000 years gone, and reading it, you realise at once that the political life of Pompeii was not so very different from the political life of any small town since. The same ambitions, the same rivalries, the same endorsements and slogans and jokes, the same ordinary self-governing community arguing cheerfully about who should run things. It is one more way the Pompeians reach across the centuries and show us how very like us they were. And then there were the baths, and the baths deserve a moment of their own because they were one of the great pleasures of Roman life. Pompeii had several public bath complexes, and going to the baths was something many Pompeians did most days. But a Roman bath was far more than a place to get clean. It was a place to relax, to exercise, to meet friends, to do business, to pass the afternoon. You would move through a sequence of rooms, an undressing room where you left your clothes, then rooms of increasing heat, a warm room, then a hot room thick with steam, heated by hot air flowing through spaces under the floor and inside the walls. A clever Roman system that warmed the whole building. You would sweat and be scraped clean, and then move to the cold room for a bracing cold plunge. There was a courtyard for exercise, for ball games and lifting weights and walking. The baths were warm and social and comfortable, decorated with paintings and stucco and statues, filled with the sound of voices and splashing water and the business of a town at its leisure. To sink into the warm water of the Pompeii baths on a quiet afternoon must have been one of the simple, deep pleasures of life here, and it's a pleasant thing to imagine now, the warmth, the steam, the murmur of voices, the easing of the day. The Romans understood something we are perhaps only now rediscovering, that there is a deep restorative power in warmth and water and unhurried time. The bathhouses of Pompeii were beautifully made, their ceilings vaulted and decorated, the warm rooms snug and enveloping, the whole experience designed to ease the body and quiet the mind. You went not to rush through a wash, but to linger, to let the warmth soak in, to move slowly from room to room as the day's cares loosened their grip. The heated floors were warm beneath your feet. The steam rose in the hot room, soft and thick. Light fell through small, high windows, dim and golden. Voices murmured and echoed gently off the stone. It was a place built for relaxation, for the deliberate setting aside of effort and worry, a daily ritual of comfort available even to ordinary people, for the baths were cheap to enter, open to nearly all. Just to imagine it is soothing, that warm, dim, steamy refuge at the heart of the busy town, where the people of Pompeii went, day after day, to be warm and easy and at peace for an hour or two before the evening came. Pompeii had its places of entertainment too. There was a large open-air theatre built into a slope so that the rows of stone seats rose up the hillside, looking down on the stage, where the people watched plays, comedies and tragedies and the popular entertainments of the day, with the sky above and, beyond the top of the theatre, the view out toward the bay. Beside it was a smaller roofed theatre, more intimate, for music and poetry and recitations. And at the eastern edge of the town stood the amphitheatre, a great oval arena, one of the oldest stone amphitheatres known anywhere in the Roman world, where the people gathered in their thousands to watch the games and the contests that the Romans loved. Tens of thousands could pack into it, not just from Pompeii, but from the towns all around. It was a place of huge passion and excitement, sometimes too much so. We even know of a great riot that broke out there once between the people of Pompeii and the people of a neighbouring town who had come for the games, a brawl so serious that the Roman authorities in distant Rome heard of it and punished Pompeii by banning the games there for a number of years. A small human drama, a sports riot, 2,000 years ago, remembered still. Imagine the town on the day of a great spectacle at the amphitheatre. The streets would fill with people streaming toward the arena. Locals and visitors come from all around the bay, the whole region converging on Pompeii for the event. There would be a buzz of excitement in the air, the vendors selling food and drink, the crowds pressing in through the entrances, finding their places on the great curved banks of stone seats, the noise rising as the arena filled, thousands upon thousands of voices, until the whole oval was packed and roaring under the southern sun. We even know, from the painted notices on the walls, the kinds of announcements that were made to advertise these events, and from the graffiti, the names of the local heroes the crowds adored. It was the great popular passion of the town, the thing people looked forward to and talked about and travelled for, the big communal occasion that brought everyone together in shared excitement. And then, when it was over, the crowds would pour back out into the streets and disperse, the visitors heading home along the roads, the locals back to their houses, the town slowly settling again into its ordinary rhythm, the great arena left empty and silent until the next time. So there it is, the heart of Pompeii, the forum with its temples and its business, the baths with their warmth and ease, the theatres and the great amphitheatre with their crowds and their entertainments. All the rich public life of a Roman town, all the ways its people came together, worshipped together, governed themselves, did business, relaxed, were entertained. A complete little world, humming with life, under the southern sun, beneath the patient mountain. Chapter 5. The People of Pompeii. Let me tell you now about the people themselves, because the truly extraordinary thing about Pompeii, the thing that sets it apart from almost every other ancient place, is how much we know about the ordinary lives lived here. Most of the ancient world has come down to us only through its emperors and its battles and its great men. But Pompeii, because of how it was preserved, has come down to us through its ordinary people, their homes and their shops and their meals and their jokes and their loves and their daily routines. Walking through Pompeii, we are not in the company of emperors. We are in the company of bakers and shopkeepers and housewives and children and slaves, the ordinary people of the Roman world, whom we so rarely get to meet. We meet them, above all, through their writing on the walls. The Pompeians, it turns out, wrote on everything. The walls of their town are covered in graffiti, scratched and painted, thousands of pieces of it, and reading it is like suddenly hearing the voices of ordinary ancient people speaking directly to us across 2,000 years. They wrote election notices recommending their favourite candidates. They wrote advertisements for goods and for rooms to rent and for upcoming games at the amphitheatre. They wrote the prices of things in the taverns. But they also wrote, simply, the things that people have always written. They wrote their names and the names of the people they loved. They wrote declarations of love and complaints about love gone wrong. They wrote jokes and insults and boasts. They wrote that so-and-so was here. They wrote little lines of poetry and rude remarks and quiet, sad ones. One famous scratch on a wall reads, more or less, that nothing can last forever, that the sun shines and then it sets and sinks beneath the sea. Someone wrote that, an ordinary person, on a wall in Pompeii long ago, and it is still there. Think about what a gift that is across all that time. Most of the people who have ever lived left no written trace at all. We do not know their names, their thoughts, their jokes, the small things that made them laugh or sigh. They lived and they died, and the silence closed over them completely. But the people of Pompeii, ordinary people, not kings or generals or famous writers, left their words scratched on the walls of their town, and the ash preserved them. And so we can read, today, what amused them and moved them and annoyed them. The proud boasts and the lovers' quarrels and the tavern complaints and the wistful little observations about how nothing lasts. A child practiced the alphabet on a wall, and we can see it. Someone recorded that they had eaten well here, or that a friend was a good fellow, or that they missed someone, or loved someone, or thought someone else a fool. These are the most ordinary words imaginable, and that is exactly what makes them so precious, because the ordinary almost never survives. And here it did. The actual offhand thoughts of regular people 2,000 years gone, still speaking, still funny, still human, still alive on the plaster. We meet the Pompeians too through the work they did. This was a town full of trades and crafts. There were the bakers with their mills and ovens. There were the fullers who cleaned and made cloth in their great vats, a smelly but essential trade. There were potters and metal workers and carpenters and stonemasons and glassmakers. There were merchants who grew rich on trade, and the famous garum, a strong fermented fish sauce that the Romans loved and that was made and sold here. One Pompeii merchant growing wealthy enough on it to own a fine house. There were innkeepers and tavern keepers, doctors, teachers, builders. There were the farmers of the rich surrounding countryside, bringing in their grain and grapes and olives and produce. There were the women of the town, running households, working in shops and trades, weaving, selling, raising children. And there were the enslaved people, everywhere, doing the heavy and the humble work, the grinding of the grain and the carrying of the water, and the labour of the great houses and the workshops, mostly nameless to us now, but present in their thousands, the hidden foundation that so much of Roman life was built upon. We even know the names and trades of particular people here and there because the town preserved them on shop signs, in records, scratched on walls, painted over doorways. We know of a banker whose records survived, written on wooden tablets, the everyday business of lending and collecting. We know of the fish sauce merchant who grew rich and proud of his product. We know the names of politicians who stood for the local offices because their supporters painted endorsements of them all over town. We know of bakers and innkeepers and others by the signs of their trades. Each of these is a tiny window onto a real working life. A person who got up each morning and went to a particular job and was known in the town for a particular thing, exactly as people are today. And behind the few we can name stand the thousands we cannot, the ordinary working people of Pompeii, free and enslaved, whose labour filled the days and made the town run, and who are remembered now, not individually, but together, as the living body of a working Roman town, caught forever in the middle of its ordinary working life. We meet them through their pleasures too. We know they loved the games at the amphitheatre and the plays at the theatre and the warmth of the baths. We know they loved good food and wine and the taverns where they gathered. We know they kept pets, dogs especially. We know they decorated their homes with care and pride, choosing the paintings on their walls and the patterns of their floors. We know they worshipped their gods and tended their household shrines and honoured their dead, whose tombs lined the roads leading out of the town, so that the living passed the remembered dead every time they came and went. We know they were, in short, people very much like us, going about lives that, beneath the strangeness of 2,000 years' distance, we recognise completely. They worked and rested and ate and loved and worried and played and hoped and went to bed at night under the same stars, in the same town, beneath the same green mountain. We know they laughed because we can read their jokes. We know they fell in love because we can read their love notes scratched on the walls. We know they grieved because we can see the care with which they remembered their dead. We know children played here because their toys were found and the places where they scratched their early letters and drawings. We know people kept gardens for the pure pleasure of beauty, planting flowers not for use, but for delight. We know they enjoyed a good meal, a cup of wine with friends, a warm afternoon at the baths, a thrilling day at the games, all the simple pleasures that have always made human life worth living. None of this was grand. None of it was the stuff of history books. It was simply life, ordinary, happy, human life, the kind that has been lived in every town, in every age, the kind we ourselves are living now. And it is precisely this ordinary happiness, this everyday human contentment, caught and preserved and handed down to us across the centuries, that makes Pompeii so precious and so moving, far more than any palace or monument could ever be. And that is the gift of Pompeii, the thing that makes it more than just another ruin. It lets us see them, not kings and conquerors, but ordinary people, frozen in the middle of their ordinary lives. And because of that, when we come at last to what happened to them, it touches us in a way that the fall of distant empires never quite can. Because by then, we know them. We have walked their streets and read their words and stood in their homes. They are not strangers to us anymore. So before we go on, let's simply sit a while longer among them in the golden years, with the town full and busy and alive. The bakers baking, the bathhouse warm, the graffiti fresh on the walls, the election notices bright with new paint, the gardens green in the courtyards, the amphitheatre roaring on game days, the children playing in the streets, the whole town living, fully and unself-consciously, with no idea that it was living the years that would one day be remembered, no idea that the patient green mountain at its back was very slowly, very quietly, beginning to stir. Chapter 6. A Day in Pompeii. Let's spend one whole ordinary day in Pompeii, in its golden years, from dawn to dark, because there is no gentler way to come to know a place than to live a single quiet day in it, and follow its people through their hours. The day in Pompeii began early, with the dawn. The people in the ancient world rose with the light and slept with the dark, having only oil lamps to push back the night. As the sky paled over the bay and the first light touched the green slopes of the mountain, the town began to stir. Shutters opened. The bakers, who had been up in the dark heating their ovens, had fresh bread ready, and the smell of it drifted through the waking streets. People rose and washed their faces with water from the basin and ate a simple breakfast, perhaps just bread, maybe with a little cheese or fruit or a sip of watered wine. The Romans ate lightly in the morning. The great meal would come later in the day. As the sun climbed, the town came fully to life. The shops opened, their wooden shutters folded back, their wares set out. The streets filled with people about their business, shopkeepers and craftsmen and merchants, slaves running errands and carrying goods, women heading to the market or the fountain, children underfoot, the wealthy heading out attended by their household, farmers bringing produce in from the countryside, the whole busy traffic of a working town getting on with its day. The morning was for work and for business. Cases were heard in the basilica, deals were struck in the forum, the workshops clattered and hammered, the fullers trod their cloth, the bakers sold their loaves, the water rang in the fountains, and people gathered there to fill their jars and exchange the news and gossip of the neighbourhood. There was a particular custom that shaped the Roman morning, especially for the wealthy and important men of the town. Early in the day, those of high standing would receive their callers, the people who depended on them, who came to pay their respects, to ask favours, to offer support, to be seen. A great man would hold a kind of morning reception in the entrance hall of his fine house, greeting the stream of clients and dependents who came to him, and this web of obligation and favour and loyalty ran all through Roman society, binding the powerful and the humble together in mutual need. So the mornings in the streets of Pompeii were full of people going to and from these calls, the clients heading to their patrons' houses, the business of the day's relationships being conducted, alongside all the ordinary commerce and errands and labour. It was a society held together by these personal bonds, by who you knew and who you owed and who owed you. And the morning was when much of that quiet, ongoing exchange took place, before the heat of the day sent everyone toward the cool of the baths. Around the middle of the day came a pause, a lighter meal, and then, for many, the great pleasure of the afternoon, the baths. As the heat of the day reached its peak, the people of Pompeii would make their way to the bathhouses, and there pass some of the most agreeable hours of the Roman day, moving through the warm and hot and cold rooms, sweating and being scraped clean and plunging into cool water, exercising in the courtyard, but above all, relaxing and socializing, meeting friends, talking, doing a little business, simply enjoying the warmth and the ease and the company. The baths were the social heart of Roman life, and an afternoon at the baths was the ordinary, comfortable pleasure of countless Pompeian days. Then, as the afternoon wore on toward evening, came the main meal of the day, the dinner, the great social occasion of Roman life. For the wealthy, this could be an elaborate affair, taken reclining on couches in the dining room, with many courses and good wine and conversation lasting into the evening, perhaps with guests, perhaps with entertainment. For ordinary people, it was simpler, but still the gathering point of the day, the family or the household coming together to eat. The Romans loved good food. The tables of Pompeii saw bread and olives and cheese, vegetables and fruit, fish from the bay and the famous fish sauce, eggs, lentils and beans. pork and other meats for those who could afford them, all washed down with the wine of the region, usually mixed with water, as was the custom. The meal was a time of coming together, of talk and ease, the day's work done, the cool of evening coming on. The dining room of a fine Pompeii house was a place of real beauty and pleasure. The diners reclined on couches arranged around the low tables, propped on cushions, eating with their fingers and from spoons, served by the household slaves, while the painted walls glowed around them in the lamplight, and, often, a doorway opened onto the green garden courtyard, so that the cool evening air and the scent of the plants drifted in. The talk would flow with the wine. There might be music, a flute or a lyre, or poetry recited, or simply the easy conversation of family and friends at the end of the day. For the Romans, dining well, in good company, unhurried, was one of the deep pleasures and arts of life. And an evening like this, in a beautiful room, with good food and wine and the people you cared for, the day's labour behind you, and nothing ahead but rest, was about as fine a thing as life could offer. It is a lovely thing to picture, those warm, lamplit dinners in the painted rooms of Pompeii, the murmur of contented voices, the garden dark and fragrant beyond the door, the whole gentle winding down of an ordinary good day, and then, as the light failed, the town settled toward sleep. There was little to do after dark in a world lit only by small flames. The lamps were lit for a while in the houses, casting their soft, flickering glow on the painted walls. People talked, or rested, or made love, or simply went to bed, for the next day would begin again at dawn. The streets emptied and grew dark and quiet. The shops were shuttered. The fountains ran on in the darkness, splashing softly at the empty corners. And the town slept under the stars, beneath the dark mass of the mountain, the whole community at rest, gathering itself for another ordinary day to come. Day after day after day, this gentle round, the dawn and the work and the baths and the dinner and the dark, the steady, peaceful rhythm of ordinary life in a Roman town, repeated through all the golden years, sweet and unremarkable and precious beyond measure, though no one living it knew quite how precious it was. Chapter 7. Beyond the Walls. Before we turn to the mountain, let's step outside the town walls for a while, into the rich country around Pompeii, because the town did not stand alone. It was the bright centre of a whole living landscape, and that landscape is part of its story, and a peaceful thing to wander through tonight. Pompeii sat near the coast, and near it was a port, for the town was a trading place, and the goods of the region flowed out across the sea from here, the wine and the oil and the famous fish sauce, while ships brought in goods from across the Roman world. Picture the little harbour, busy with boats, the goods being loaded and unloaded, the smell of the sea and the fish and the tar, the sailors and the merchants and the dock workers going about their trade. The sea was the great highway of the Roman world, far easier than the roads for moving heavy goods, and Pompeii's position near the water was a large part of what made it prosperous. The bay was dotted with boats, fishing craft and trading vessels, and the pleasure boats of the wealthy. And across the water lay other towns and cities, the whole busy, populous coast of the bay, one of the most desirable places to live in all of Italy. For this coast was, in the time of the Romans, something like a holiday coast, a place where the rich and powerful of Rome came to escape the heat and bustle of the capital and enjoy the beauty and the mild climate of the bay. All along the shore and on the slopes of the mountain, and scattered through the countryside around Pompeii, stood the villas of the wealthy, country houses and seaside estates, some of them enormous and luxurious, with their gardens and their colonnades and their views over the blue water. Even emperors had places on this coast. To own a villa on the Bay of Naples was the dream of the Roman elite, a sign that you had arrived, a place to relax among beautiful things in beautiful surroundings. So Pompeii sat in glamorous company, a working town among the playgrounds of the rich, its own prosperity bound up with the wealth and traffic of this favoured coast. And around the town stretched the farms, the source of so much of its wealth. The volcanic soil, as we have said, was extraordinarily fertile, and the land was intensively farmed, covered in vineyards and olive groves and orchards and fields of grain and vegetables. The wine of the region was famous and widely traded. The slopes of the mountain in particular were thick with vines, the grapes ripening in the warm sun, the wine pressed and stored in great jars and shipped out to be enjoyed across the Roman world. This was a landscape of abundance, carefully tended, generously productive, the rich earth giving up its fruits year after year to the people who worked it, never hinting at the fiery origin of its own fertility. And along the roads that led out of Pompeii, through its gates and into the countryside, stood the tombs of the dead. For the Romans did not bury their dead within their towns, but along the roads outside the walls, so that the tombs of the departed lined the approaches to the town, and everyone coming and going passed among them. These were not gloomy places exactly. The tombs were often handsome monuments, and they bore the names and sometimes the images and life stories of the people they remembered, so that the dead remained, in a sense, part of the community, their names still read, their memory still present, as the living passed by them on their daily journeys. There is something rather beautiful in that, the dead lining the road into town, not hidden away but remembered, greeted, kept company. The generations who had gone before, watching over the comings and goings of the generations who came after. The Pompeians lived alongside their dead, easily as a normal part of life. The tombs by the road as ordinary a sight as the fields and the vines. So that was the world beyond the walls, the busy little port, the glamorous holiday coast with its grand villas, the rich tended farmland heavy with vines and grain, and the remembered dead along the roads. Pompeii at the heart of it all, a bright, prosperous town in a generous and beautiful land, connected by sea and road to the whole wide Roman world, blessed it must have seemed in every way. Let's hold that picture of abundance and ease and beauty for a moment, the whole rich landscape in its golden years, before we turn, gently, to the green mountain at its back, and what the mountain held. Chapter 8. The Mountain. Now we have to talk about the mountain, gently, because the mountain is where this story turns. But there is no need to be afraid of it, even now. Everything we are about to come to happened almost 2,000 years ago, and everyone in it has been at peace for longer than almost any story we know. So let's approach the mountain slowly and softly, the way the Pompeians lived beneath it, without fear, for so very long. The mountain was called Vesuvius. It rose up behind Pompeii, green and tall and beautiful, and the Pompeians loved it, in the easy way you love a familiar mountain that has always simply been there. Its lower slopes were covered in farms and villas, and higher up grew the famous vineyards, the vines that gave the rich wine the region was known for. People built their country houses on its flanks to enjoy the views and the cool air. It was, to them, simply Vesuvius, the great green mountain, generous and pleasant, the source of their fertile soil and their good wine. The idea that it was a volcano, a thing that could erupt, seems to have been almost entirely lost to them. It had not erupted in any way that anyone living remembered, or that their parents or grandparents remembered, or that anyone remembered at all. Its fires had slept for so many centuries that the memory of them had faded completely from the minds of the people who lived in its shadow. To them, it was not a danger. It was home. The mountain was simply part of the landscape of their lives, as fixed and friendly a presence as the bay or the sun. It framed every view, rising green behind the town from whichever street you stood in. It gave the wine that was drunk in every tavern and at every dinner. Its slopes were dotted with the homes and farms of people who lived there gladly, enjoying the air and the views and the rich land. Travellers admired it. Poets praised the region's beauty, the lovely mountain above the lovely bay. Some old stories and a few learned men did dimly recall, or guess, that the mountain might once, long ago, have been a thing of fire. But this was distant knowledge, of no more practical concern to the people of Pompeii than the knowledge that the stars are very far away. For all the purposes of daily life, Vesuvius was exactly what it appeared to be: a beautiful, generous, harmless mountain, and the people lived beneath it in complete and contented trust, as their ancestors had for as long as anyone could remember. There had been a warning of a kind, though no one understood it as one. Some years before, a great earthquake had struck the region, a powerful one that did serious damage to Pompeii and the towns around it, toppling buildings, cracking walls, breaking the systems that carried the town's water. The Pompeians, being practical people, had simply set about repairing the damage, rebuilding, restoring. And, in fact, much of the town was still being repaired and rebuilt in the years that followed, the work not entirely finished. They took the earthquake for what earthquakes were in that part of the world, a misfortune, a thing that happened, to be cleaned up and recovered from. They did not know, because they could not know, that the earthquake had been the mountain stirring in its long sleep, the first deep movement of the fires far below, beginning, very slowly, to wake. And there were other signs, in the months and perhaps weeks before the end, that we can recognize now for what they were, but that meant little to the people at the time. Small tremors, it seems, came and went, not unusual enough in that earthquake-prone land to cause alarm. Springs and wells, some accounts suggest, behaved strangely, but none of it added up to a warning that anyone could read, because no one had the knowledge to read it. The very idea that the Green Mountain was a volcano, that it could destroy them, was simply not part of how they understood their world. They had no science of such things, no memory of an eruption, no reason at all to look at Vesuvius with anything but affection. So the signs passed unheeded, taken for the ordinary small disturbances of the earth, and life went on in the shadow of the mountain, as it always had, right up until the day it could not. And so life went on, in the years after the earthquake, in the shadow of the mountain. The town repaired itself, the shops reopened, the baths steamed, the amphitheatre roared on game days, the bakers baked, the fullers cleaned their cloth, the wealthy decorated their fine houses, the children played in the streets, the graffiti accumulated on the walls. The vines grew thick and green on the slopes of Vesuvius, and the wine was good, and the soil was rich, and the bay was blue, and the sun was warm. Year followed year, ordinary and golden, and the people of Pompeii lived their lives in peace, with no idea that they were living in the last years of their town, that the mountain they loved was no longer sleeping, but slowly, silently, gathering itself deep underground, for the day it would wake at last. There is something tender in that, and not, I think, frightening, if we hold it gently. They did not live in fear. They did not spend their last years dreading the end, because they had no idea the end was coming. They simply lived, happily enough, going about their ordinary days, loved and loving, working and resting, exactly as people always do, exactly as we do, never knowing which of our golden ordinary years will turn out to have been the last of something. They had their lives, full and complete, right up until very near the end. And that, perhaps, is a kind of mercy. Let's leave them there a moment, in those last peaceful years, the town alive and well, the mountain quiet, the future mercifully hidden, before we go on, softly, to the day itself. And really, when you think about it, this is how all of us live, all the time, and there is a strange comfort in it rather than a fear, if you turn it to the light the right way. None of us knows what tomorrow holds. None of us knows which of our ordinary days are numbered, or how. And yet we do not spend our lives paralyzed by that not knowing. We get up, and we go about our days, and we love the people we love, and we enjoy our small pleasures, and we make our plans, and we live fully and forward in the bright, uncertain present, exactly as the Pompeians did. The not knowing is not a curse. It is, in its way, a gift, the gift that lets us live freely and happily without the weight of a future we were never meant to carry. The Pompeians had that gift, right to the end. They lived their good, ordinary lives, unburdened by what was coming, and that is not a tragedy, but simply the human condition, the one we all share. And there is peace in recognizing it, in feeling our kinship with those people who lived and loved and never knew, just as we live and love and never know, and are fine, and are free, and are at peace. Chapter 9. The Day Told Gently. I am going to tell you now about the day the mountain woke, and I am going to tell it to you carefully and gently, because it is the hard part of our story. But remember, the whole way through, that this happened nearly 2,000 years ago, that everyone in it has been at rest for longer than almost anyone we could name, and that out of this one terrible day came the strange gift that has let us know and love this town across all those centuries. There is sorrow here, but there is also a kind of peace, and even a kind of wonder. So stay soft, and let it be gentle. None of this can trouble anyone now. It was late summer, or perhaps autumn, in the year we now call 79 AD. The town was going about its ordinary day, and then, around the middle of the day, the mountain that had slept for centuries finally woke. With a great force, Vesuvius sent an enormous column of ash and pumice and gas blasting high into the sky, miles high, a vast dark pillar rising up over the bay, spreading at the top into a shape that a Roman writer who saw it from across the water compared to a great umbrella pine tree, a tall trunk of cloud spreading into branches at the top. It was a thing no one living had ever seen or imagined. The people of Pompeii looked up at it in wonder and fear, this towering dark column climbing into the sky above their beloved green mountain. We actually have an account of that day written down, which is a remarkable thing, one of the very few eyewitness descriptions of such an event to survive from the ancient world. A young man watched the whole thing unfold from across the bay at a safe distance, and years later he wrote it all down in letters, describing the strange cloud rising over the mountain, the shape of it, the darkness, the fear and confusion, the ash falling, the people fleeing. His uncle, a famous scholar and naval commander, actually sailed toward the eruption, partly out of curiosity and partly to help with the rescue of people along the shore, and did not survive the day. So we have, across 2,000 years, a real human voice describing what it was like to watch the mountain wake, the awe and the terror of it, the sense of a world turned upside down. It makes the day real in a way few ancient events ever are. And it reminds us, too, that even on that day, there were people sailing toward the danger to help, that human courage and kindness were present even in the midst of the catastrophe, as they so often are. And then it began to fall. The ash and the light pumice stone carried up into the sky began to rain down on the town, gently at first, then heavier, a steady falling of small stones and ash, covering the streets, the rooftops, the gardens, piling up hour by hour. Many of the people of Pompeii, seeing the danger, did the wise thing and left. They gathered what they could carry and fled, out through the gates, away along the roads, down toward the sea and the boats, escaping while there was still time. We do not know how many got away, but it seems that a great many did, that most of the town perhaps saw what was coming and left in those first hours. That is worth holding on to. The roads out of Pompeii that day were full of people saving themselves, and most of them, we believe, lived. Hold on to that image, because it matters, and it is a hopeful one in the midst of a hard day. Picture the roads leading away from Pompeii, crowded with people walking to safety, families together, carrying their children and their bundles of belongings, helping the old and the slow, streaming away from the falling ash toward the safer country beyond, toward the sea, toward the boats that could carry them off. The great majority of the people we have come to know tonight, the bakers and the shopkeepers and the families and the children, were very likely among them, walking away to safety while there was still time, to live out the rest of their lives in other towns, to grow old, to tell and retell the story of the day the mountain woke and they walked away from their buried home. The town was lost, but its people, most of them, were not. They went on. That is a true and a comforting thing, and it is right to hold it close as we come to the harder part. But some stayed. Some sheltered in their houses, hoping to wait it out, believing perhaps that the falling stone would stop, not understanding what was truly happening. Some could not leave, the old, the sick, the very young, the enslaved who were not permitted to go. Some left it too late. And through that long and terrible day and into the night, the ash and pumice kept falling deeper and deeper until roofs began to collapse under the weight of it and the streets were buried. I will not dwell on the hardest part. I will only say, gently, that in the end, the mountains sent down something worse than the falling ash. Surges of superheated gas and ash that swept down its slopes, and that for those who had remained in the town, the end, when it came quickly. It was, mercifully, very fast. And then it was over. By the time the mountain finished, after that long day and night of fury, Pompeii was gone, buried completely, many feet deep, under a thick blanket of ash and stone. The streets, the houses, the forum, the temples, the baths, the theatres, the gardens, all of it vanished beneath the grey. Where a living town had stood that morning, there was now only a silent, smoking, featureless waste. The whole landscape changed. The very shape of the coast altered. The bright town simply gone, as though it had never been. It is a terribly sad thing, and I will not pretend otherwise. A town full of life ended in a day. But let us hold now the gentler truths that sit alongside the sorrow. Most of the people, it seems, escaped and lived and carried on their lives elsewhere and told their children and their grandchildren of the day the mountain woke. The ones who did not escape have rested in peace for nearly 2,000 years, longer than the whole history of most nations, long beyond any reach of suffering. And the very ash that buried them, the very thing that ended the town, was also, as we shall see, the thing that saved it, that wrapped it up and held it safe and whole through all the centuries that followed, so that one day, long after, it could be found again, and the lost town could speak to us, and its people could be remembered, as we are remembering them now. Out of the burial came a kind of immortality. The mountain took the town, and then, without meaning to, it kept it, perfectly, as a gift to all the ages that came after. Let's follow it now into its long sleep beneath the ash, and then, in time, to the wonderful day it was found again. Chapter 10. The Long Silence. After the mountain finished, a great silence came down over the place where Pompeii had been, and it lasted, in a sense, for nearly 1,700 years. In the days and weeks after the eruption, some of the survivors are thought to have come back, to dig down through the ash where they could, to try to recover valuables, to reach what had been their homes and their possessions. There are signs of this. Tunnels dug through the buried town in search of treasures or keepsakes. But it was hopeless mostly. The town was buried too deep, the landscape too utterly changed. There was no rebuilding Pompeii. It was simply gone. And in time, the survivors moved on, settled elsewhere, built new lives, and the buried town was left behind. And Pompeii was not alone in its fate. The same eruption had buried other communities around the mountain. Most famous among them was Herculaneum, a smaller and wealthier town on the other side of Vesuvius, closer to the sea, a quiet and prosperous place of fine houses looking out over the water. Herculaneum was buried too, but differently, not under falling ash and stone, but under deep flows of volcanic material that sealed it even more completely, in some ways, than Pompeii, preserving things that even Pompeii did not keep: wooden doors and furniture and beams, even food, even fragile things that elsewhere would have crumbled to nothing. There were other settlements lost as well, villas and farms and smaller places, the whole populous landscape around the mountain transformed in a day. The eruption did not take one town. It took a whole little world, the bright, busy human world that had grown up around the base of the beautiful mountain, and sealed all of it away beneath the ash and the rock. And then, slowly, it was forgotten. Not all at once, but over the generations, as those who remembered it died, and their children half remembered it, and their grandchildren only knew it as an old story. The Roman Empire itself rolled on for centuries more, and then declined and fell, and the world changed utterly, and through all of it, Pompeii lay buried and quiet beneath its blanket of ash and the soil and greenery that gradually grew over the top. The very location of it grew uncertain. People knew, vaguely, from old writings, that towns had been destroyed by Vesuvius somewhere in this region long ago. But exactly where Pompeii had stood, what lay beneath the fields and vineyards that now covered the area, was lost. Farmers worked the rich soil above the buried town for century after century, the same fertile volcanic soil, never knowing that just beneath their feet, perfectly preserved in the darkness, lay a complete Roman town, its streets and houses and paintings and the very loaves in its ovens, waiting. Think of those long centuries of forgetting, the strange double life of the place. Above ground, the world went on, busy and noisy and full of change. New people came to live in the region who had never heard the name Pompeii. They planted their vines in the rich earth, the same earth that covered the town, and harvested their grapes and made their wine, perhaps even noticing now and then a fragment of old stone turned up by a plough and thinking nothing of it. They built their own homes and lived their own lives and died and were buried in their turn, generation after generation, the 1,600 years, all of them walking and working and sleeping directly above a hidden town they did not know was there. And below them, in the dark and the silence, Pompeii kept its perfect stillness, its painted walls glowing in the blackness where no eye could see them, its streets empty, its ovens holding their ancient bread. The whole bright frozen moment of its last day held safe and unchanging, while the centuries rolled by overhead. A whole world, asleep beneath the world, waiting, though it did not know it was waiting, for the day someone would dig down and find it again. There is something strange and almost peaceful about those long centuries of forgetting. The whole drama of the town, its life and its terrible end, was over, sealed away, at rest. The world above went on through all its own dramas, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the long sweep of the centuries, while below, in the dark, the lost town simply waited, holding its moment, holding its people, holding its bright paintings and its everyday objects, exactly as they had been on that last ordinary morning. It asked nothing, it troubled no one. It simply lay there, patient and perfect and forgotten, beneath the green fields and the warm sun and the same blue bay, while the mountain that had buried it settled back, in time, into its long sleep again, green once more, peaceful once more, giving no sign of what it had done or what it guarded. And so the centuries passed, and Pompeii slept, and waited to be remembered. Chapter 11. Found Again. The waking of Pompeii, after all those centuries of sleep, came slowly and almost by accident, and then with a wonder that astonished the whole world. The first hints came when people digging in the area over the centuries occasionally turned up ancient remains, fragments of walls, pieces of marble, coins, the odd inscription, signs that something old lay beneath the ground. In time, workers digging a channel to carry water actually cut right through part of the buried town and brought up ancient stones and even inscriptions, including, it said, one bearing the very name of Pompeii, though no one yet understood what they had found. The buried town was sending up little messages, and for a long while no one read them correctly. It is almost funny, in a gentle way, how long the town tried to announce itself before anyone listened. A farmer's plough would strike old stone. A digger would turn up a fragment of painted plaster, or a coin, or a piece of marble carved with letters. Here and there someone would sink a well or a channel and come upon worked stone deep underground. The clues were there, scattered across the centuries, the buried town quietly offering up pieces of itself to the world above. But the people who found them mostly did not know what they were looking at, had no framework to understand that a whole intact Roman town lay just beneath their fields. They took the fragments for odd curiosities, or building stone to be reused, or simply obstacles to be dug around, and went on with their work, and the great secret kept itself a while longer, waiting for an age curious enough and knowing enough to finally dig down and understand. It was in the 1700s, the age when Europeans were rediscovering a passion for the ancient classical world, that the real uncovering began. First, the nearby town of Herculaneum, another community buried by the same eruption on the other side of the mountain, began to be explored, its astonishing remains brought up from deep underground. And then, around the middle of the 1700s, organised digging began at the site of Pompeii itself, under the patronage of the king who ruled the region. And what the diggers found, as they cleared away the ash, amazed everyone. For Pompeii had not simply been destroyed, it had been preserved. The ash that buried it had sealed it away from the air and the weather and the slow decay that wears down all other ruins, and had held it, with astonishing faithfulness, almost exactly as it had been on its last day. As the excavators dug down, they uncovered not crumbled foundations and vague outlines, the usual remains of the ancient world, but a town. Streets you could walk down, Houses you could enter, their walls still standing, their rooms still arranged. And on those walls, the paintings, the rich reds and golds and blues, still bright, still vivid, scenes from mythology and daily life and elegant decoration, looking almost as fresh as the day they were painted, after 16 centuries in the dark. Mosaics still set in the floors, the shapes of furniture, the objects of daily life, pots and pans and tools and lamps and jewelry and coins, the small, ordinary things people use and leave behind. Even, as I mentioned, food, loaves of bread in ovens, the remains of meals on tables, fruit and eggs and nuts, the very groceries of a Roman household. It was not a ruin. It was a moment preserved. It was an entire living town, caught and held exactly as it had been 2,000 years before. The sheer completeness of it was what astonished everyone, and astonishes still. It was not that a few fine things had survived, the way a statue or a temple survives elsewhere. It was that everything had survived, the grand and the humble together, the painted mansion and the cheap tavern, the temple and the latrine, the masterpiece on the wall and the shopping list scratched beside it. The whole texture of a real town, with nothing edited out, nothing left to the imagination. The excavators could trace the streets a person would have walked, enter the house they would have lived in, see the shop where they bought their bread, read the notice they would have passed on the wall, stand in the very rooms where they ate and slept and loved and died. No other place on earth offered anything like it. Pompeii was not a collection of relics. It was a town, whole, caught in a single ordinary moment and held for the ages. And walking into it was less like visiting a ruin than like stepping, impossibly, into the living past itself. Nothing like it had ever been found. The rest of the ancient world had come down to us in fragments, in broken statues and toppled columns and the bare foundations of vanished buildings, requiring great feats of imagination to picture how people had actually lived. But Pompeii needed no imagination. Here it simply was, the daily life of the Roman world, frozen and complete, the houses and the shops and the streets and the painted walls and the everyday things, all of it there to be walked through and marvelled at. The discovery electrified Europe. It reshaped how people understood the ancient world. Artists and scholars and the curious came from everywhere to see it, and the images and styles uncovered at Pompeii influenced art and design across the whole continent. The lost town, after 17 centuries of silence, had been found, and it had a great deal to say. It is hard to overstate what a sensation it was. In an age when educated Europeans revered the ancient classical world above almost all else, here suddenly was that world made real, not in books or in broken marble, but in whole painted rooms you could stand in. The fashionable and the learned made the journey south to see it with their own eyes, and went away changed. The elegant decorative styles found on Pompeii's walls swept through European art and design, shaping the way grand houses were painted and furnished far away in the north. The very idea of what the ancient world had looked like, how its people had actually lived their daily lives, was transformed by what came out of the ash. Pompeii did not just give up its treasures. It gave up its ordinariness, its dailiness, the texture of real Roman life. And that turned out to be the most valuable treasure of all, the thing no other ancient site had ever been able to provide. The town that had been forgotten for 17 centuries became, almost overnight, one of the most famous places in the world, and it has remained so ever since. Chapter 12. The Town That Came Back. As the excavators worked, year after year, decade after decade, and eventually century after century, for the digging at Pompeii has gone on, in one form or another ever since, more and more of the town came back into the light. And they began to find not only the buildings and the objects, but, in a sense, the people. This is the most tender part of Pompeii's rediscovery, and I'll tell it gently. As the diggers cleared the ash, they sometimes came upon empty spaces, hollows in the hardened material. And someone, a clever and thoughtful excavator long ago, realized what these hollows were, and had the idea of carefully filling them with plaster, letting it set, and then clearing away the surrounding ash. And when they did, the plaster revealed the shapes of the people of Pompeii, the forms of those who had not escaped, preserved as gentle hollows in the ash that had settled around them long ago and then hardened, while what it enclosed slowly returned to the earth over the centuries. These plaster forms show the people in their last moments, and they are deeply moving to see. A person resting, a person with an arm raised, families together even, heartbreakingly, the shapes of beloved pets. I will not describe them in detail, because they are a solemn thing, and we are here to rest. I will only say that they make the people of Pompeii suddenly, achingly real, that they have moved every visitor who has ever stood before them, and that they are treated, rightly, with great reverence and care. It is a strange and profound thing to be able to look upon the actual forms of ordinary people who lived and died 2,000 years ago. It collapses all that distance in an instant. These were not abstractions, not names in a history book, but real human beings, as real as you and me, who lived in this town, walked these streets, loved their families, went about their days, and met, at the end, something none of us can imagine. And yet, even here, hold on to the gentleness. They have been at peace for nearly 2,000 years. The moment of their ending, terrible as it was, lasted only moments, and is so very long past now. What remains is not their suffering, but their memory, recovered, honoured, and held with tenderness by all the millions who have come to know them since. In being found, they were, in a way, given back to the world, rescued from the total forgetting that swallows almost everyone who has ever lived. We do not even know most of their names, but we know they were here. We know how they lived, and we remember them. There are far worse fates than to be remembered gently, with care, by people 2,000 years in your future. I think the reason the people of Pompeii move us so is that, through them, we feel the truth that history is not really about the great and the powerful at all. It is about ordinary people, billions upon billions of them, each living a single, precious life, each the centre of their own whole world, each loving and working and hoping and fearing, and then passing on. The emperors and the generals fill the history books, but the real story of humanity is the story of the ordinary people, the ones who built the houses and baked the bread and raised the children, in Pompeii and everywhere else, in every age. Almost all of them are gone without a trace, their names and faces and lives dissolved into the silence of time. Pompeii is one of the rare places where a handful of those ordinary lives were caught and kept, so that we can look upon them and remember, through them, all the countless others we cannot see. To honour the people of Pompeii is, in a way, to honour all the forgotten ordinary people who have ever lived, including, perhaps, our own forebears, whose names we may not even know, but to whom we owe our very existence. It is a tender and a humbling thing, and a strangely peaceful one. And the town they left, that whole preserved world, has gone on being uncovered and studied and cared for, slowly, patiently, right up to our own time. Generation after generation of archaeologists has worked there, clearing, recording, preserving, learning. And they have been careful, increasingly, not to dig it all up at once, but to leave much of it still buried, still sleeping beneath the ash. Both because the buried parts are safer there, protected, and so that future generations, with better tools and gentler methods, can uncover them more wisely than we could. So even now, a part of Pompeii still sleeps underground, still waiting, its streets and houses and paintings still held in the dark, to be woken, perhaps, by hands not yet born. The town gives itself back to us slowly, a little at a time, across the centuries, as though it knows there is no hurry, as though it has all the time in the world. There is something deeply right about that restraint, that willingness to leave part of the town still sleeping. The earlier centuries of digging were not always gentle. Much was lost or damaged in the rush to uncover treasures before people understood how to do it carefully. We know better now, and so we go slowly and leave much undisturbed, trusting that the buried earth will keep it safe, as it has kept it safe for 2,000 years already, until a wiser future is ready to receive it. It is a kind of humility and a kind of patience that matches the patience of the place itself. The town waited 16 centuries to be found. It can wait a little longer to be fully understood. And there is something peaceful in knowing that even now, beneath the excavated streets and the walking visitors, a part of old Pompeii still rests in the quiet dark, undisturbed, perfectly preserved, dreaming its long dream, in no hurry at all to wake. Chapter 13. Pompeii Today. So what is Pompeii now, in our own time? It is one of the most remarkable places on the whole earth, and one of the most visited, a vast open-air window into the ancient world, where millions of people come, year after year, to walk the streets of a Roman town. To visit Pompeii today is to do something almost magical. You pass through the ancient gates, and you are there, in the town, on the real Roman streets, the great paving stones beneath your feet still rutted with the grooves of ancient cartwheels, the stepping stones still set at the crossings. You can walk the length of the main streets, past the shops and the taverns and the bakeries, and step into the houses, into the atriums open to the sky, into the green peristyle gardens, many of them replanted now, so that they bloom again as they once did. You can stand in rooms where the painted walls still glow with their ancient reds and golds. You can visit the Forum and stand in the great open square with the temples around you and the green mass of Vesuvius rising beyond, exactly as the Pompeians saw it. You can sit in the theatre on the same stone seats where Roman audiences sat. You can walk into the vast amphitheatre, the oldest of its kind, and stand in the arena and feel the size of the crowds it once held. It is not a model or a reconstruction. It is the real thing, the actual town, the genuine streets and stones and walls and paintings, waiting for you to walk through them. There is a feeling that comes over many people when they walk through Pompeii, a feeling hard to describe but easy to recognize once you have felt it. It is the feeling of time collapsing, of the 2,000 years between you and the Pompeians suddenly thinning away to almost nothing, so that for a moment you are simply standing in a town, a real town where real people lived, and you can almost hear them, almost feel them just around the next corner. You see the ruts worn by their carts, and you know that real carts made them, day after day, long ago. You see the counter of a tavern, and you can almost see the cups set out, almost hear the talk and the laughter. You step into a house, and the light falls through the atrium, just as it fell for the family who lived there, and their painted walls glow around you just as they glowed for them. The distance dissolves. They become real, present, near. And then you walk out again, into your own time, but you carry something of them with you, a sense of connection across the centuries, a quiet certainty that they were real, that they were like you, that the gulf of time between you is, in some deep way, not so very wide after all. And the mountain is still there, of course, rising behind the town just as it always has, green and tall and beautiful. Vesuvius is still an active volcano, watched now very closely, studied and monitored constantly, the most observed volcano in the world, so that its moods are understood and its people warned in a way the ancient Pompeians never could have been. It sleeps now, as it slept before, but we keep our eye on it, as the Pompeians did not know to do. It is a strange thing to stand in the excavated town and look up at the quiet green mountain that made it, and ended it, and preserved it, all three, the giver and the destroyer and the keeper, sleeping there above its handiwork in the warm Italian sun. Pompeii is cared for now as one of the treasures of the world, protected, studied, conserved. The long work of preserving it against time and weather and the sheer pressure of all the visitors who love it going on continually. It is not without its troubles, the constant battle to keep so fragile and so vast a thing safe. But it endures, and it is tended, and it goes on offering to everyone who comes that astonishing gift, the chance to walk into the ancient world and find it not crumbled and vague, but vivid and real and human. The chance to meet the people of Pompeii where they lived, and the work goes on, gently, patiently, with great care, by people who love the place and give their lives to looking after it. Archaeologists still dig, carefully now, learning more all the time. Conservators tend the fragile painted walls, shoring up what is crumbling, protecting what is fading, fighting the slow, patient war against weather and time and decay that any such place demands, much as the Pompeians once fought their own daily wars to keep their town bright and whole. New discoveries still come, even now, fresh rooms uncovered, new paintings revealed, new small windows opened onto the life of the ancient town, so that our knowledge of Pompeii is not finished and fixed, but still growing, still deepening, the town still slowly giving up its secrets to those patient enough to ask. It is a living relationship, in a way, between the long-dead town and the living people who care for it and come to see it. A relationship of tenderness and respect and endless fascination, carrying the memory of Pompeii forward, generation by generation, keeping the lost town found, keeping its people remembered, holding it all safe for the ages still to come. Chapter 14. The Long Reach of Time. Before we come to the last quiet thoughts of our night, let me sit with you a while in the strangeness and the wonder of the time that separates us from Pompeii, because there is something in it that, held gently, is one of the most soothing thoughts of all. Nearly 2,000 years stand between us and the people of Pompeii. It is almost impossible to truly feel how long that is. Think of all that has happened in the world since the mountain woke. The Roman Empire that ruled Pompeii went on for centuries more, and then slowly came apart and fell and vanished into history. Whole new peoples rose and spread across Europe. Languages that did not yet exist when Pompeii lived were born and grew and became the tongues of nations. Kingdoms and empires beyond counting have risen and flourished and crumbled away. Religions spread across the world. Whole continents that the Pompeians did not even know existed were discovered and settled by people whose ancestors, in Pompeii's day, lived lives the Pompeians could never have imagined. Everything, the entire world we know, the whole shape of the modern Earth, came into being in the long ages after Pompeii was buried. And through every bit of it, every century, every great change, The little town lay quiet beneath the ash, unchanging, waiting. There is a vertigo in that, if you reach for it, the sheer depth of the time. But there is also, I think, a deep comfort, and it is the comfort I want to leave you with as you drift towards sleep. Because here is the thing. All of those people, across all of those centuries, the Romans and those who came after them, and those who came after them, all the countless generations between Pompeii and us, every one of them lived their own ordinary days, just as the Pompeians did, just as we do. They woke and worked and ate and loved and worried and rested and went to sleep at night and woke again, day after day, through all their lives, and then they passed on and were mostly forgotten, and the world went on without them, and here we still are. The river of ordinary human days runs on and on, person after person, generation after generation, each one feeling, while they live, that their own moment is the whole of the world, and then giving way gently to the next. The Pompeians were one bend in that river, we are another, and the river runs on, calm and deep and unhurried, as it always has, as it always will. And there is peace in being a part of that, in feeling yourself one small, ordinary life among the countless ordinary lives that the long ages have held and let go. It takes the weight off, somehow. The Pompeians did not need to be emperors to matter. They mattered simply by living their lives. And we remember them now with tenderness precisely because their lives were ordinary, like ours. You do not need to be anything more than what you are, living your own ordinary days, to be a true part of that long, deep, gentle human story that stretches all the way back to the painted streets of Pompeii and far beyond, and all the way forward past us into times we will never see. There is a place for you in it, simply as you are. And tonight, lying here, you can rest in that, can let yourself be just one quiet, ordinary life among all the others, held in the long, calm reach of time, and let the weight of everything settle and ease as you drift down toward sleep. And perhaps that is the deepest gift the people of Pompeii give us across all the centuries. Not a warning, not a fear, but a kind of fellowship, a quiet hand reached across 2,000 years. They lived as we live. They loved their ordinary days as we love ours, or as we might learn to. They did not know what was coming, and neither do we. And that is all right, for them and for us. They were here, and then they were gone, and they are remembered now with tenderness and held in peace. And one day, long from now, we too will be the people of the distant past, our own ordinary days finished and gone, perhaps remembered by someone, perhaps not, but part, all the same, of the same long, gentle human story, the same deep river of ordinary lives flowing on and on through time. There is no fear in that, only a kind of belonging. We are part of something very old and very large and very kind. And tonight, that can hold you as you let go of the day and sink down softly into rest. Chapter 15. What Pompeii Keeps. Before we say goodnight to the town, let me sit with you a while longer in the quiet and think about why Pompeii holds us the way it does. Because there is something in its story that, once you feel it, settles very deep and very gently in the heart. Most of what we know of the ancient world is grand and distant. Emperors and generals, wars and conquests, the rise and fall of empires, marble statues of famous men. It is the history of the powerful, the exceptional, the remembered few. But Pompeii is different. Pompeii is the history of everyone else. It is the baker and his bread, the shopkeeper and his counter, the child and her toys, the gardener and his flowers, the lovers who scratched their names on a wall, the family gathered in a painted room, the slave carrying water across a courtyard. It is ordinary life, the kind of life that almost never survives, because ordinary life is precisely the thing that history usually forgets. Empires get remembered. Breakfast does not. And yet here, in Pompeii, the breakfast survived. The ordinary survived. The whole texture of regular human days 2,000 years ago was caught and kept and given back to us. Think of everything we would never otherwise know. We would have the names of emperors and the dates of battles, the grand outlines of Roman history. But we would not know what an ordinary Roman house looked like inside, how the rooms were arranged, what colours people painted their walls. We would not know what was sold in the shops, what people ate and drank, how a bakery worked, what a tavern counter looked like. We would not know the jokes people told, the things they scratched on walls, the names of the gladiators the crowds adored, the slogans of local elections. We would not have the gardens, the fountains, the household shrines, the mosaics, the 1,000 small, ordinary details of how people actually lived their daily lives. All of that, the real substance of ordinary existence, would be lost, as it is lost for almost the entire ancient world. But Pompeii kept it. Pompeii is the one place where we can simply walk in and see it, the daily life of 2,000 years ago, preserved whole. That is why it is one of the most precious places on earth, not because anything grand happened there, but because the ordinary was saved there. And the ordinary is the rarest treasure of all. And that is why Pompeii moves people so deeply, I think. Because in it we recognize ourselves. We look at their streets and their shops and their homes, their graffiti and their gardens and their dinner tables, and we understand, suddenly and completely, that they were exactly like us. They wanted the same things. They worried about the same things. They loved their children and their homes and their comforts and their pets. They wrote silly things and tender things on walls. They went to the baths to relax after a long day, and met friends for a drink, and complained about the price of wine, and looked forward to the games, and decorated their homes with care, and lived, fully and ordinarily, in a world that felt to them as solid and permanent as ours feels to us. And then, in a single day, it all ended. With no warning they understood, and the whole bright, ordinary world of theirs was gone. There is a lesson in that, but it is not a frightening one, not if we hold it gently here in the dark. The lesson is simply how precious the ordinary is, how much there is to love in a regular day, a warm bath, a good meal, a familiar street, the people we care about, the small comforts of home. The Pompeians had all of that, and did not know how precious it was, because we never do, because it is simply the water we swim in, and it is precious. Your own ordinary day, the one you lived today, the one you will live tomorrow, is precious in exactly the same way, full of small good things that you, like them, will mostly not notice because they are simply there. Pompeii, in its quiet way, reminds us to notice, not in fear, but in gratitude, to love the ordinary while we have it, because the ordinary is, in the end, the whole of life, and it is a sweet and a beautiful thing. And there is comfort, too, in how the story ends, or rather, in how it never quite ended at all. Because Pompeii was not truly lost. It was kept. The people were not entirely forgotten. They were found again, and remembered. Their town speaks to us still, more vividly than almost any other place from the ancient world. Across 2,000 years, they reach us, these ordinary people, and we know them, and we hold them in mind. And in doing so, we give them a kind of gentle immortality that the emperors with all their monuments might almost envy. The mountain took their town, but it could not take them from memory. They are here, still, in every visitor who walks their streets, in every person who hears their story, in you, tonight, drifting off with the people of Pompeii in your thoughts. That is not an ending. That is a kind of continuing, soft and quiet and enduring. The lost town and its ordinary people, remembered and loved, 2,000 years on. It is a strange thought, and a lovely one, that the very thing which destroyed Pompeii is what saved it. Had the mountain never woken, Pompeii would have lived on, and grown, and changed. And in time, like almost every other Roman town, it would have been rebuilt and built over, and worn away by the slow grinding of the centuries, until little or nothing of the ancient town remained, and we would know it only as a name, if at all. It is precisely because it was buried, frozen, sealed away in a single terrible moment, that it survived so perfectly, that the painted walls kept their colour, and the bread stayed in the ovens, and the whole ordinary day was held intact for us to find. The catastrophe was also the preservation. The ending was also the keeping. Out of the worst day in the town's life came the gift that has let it outlive, in memory and presence, almost every other place of its age. There is a deep and gentle mystery in that, the way destruction and preservation turned out to be, in this one case, the very same act. And it is the kind of thing worth turning over softly in the mind as you drift towards sleep. The strange, tender way that even the hardest endings can hold, hidden inside them, a kind of keeping, a kind of grace. So, as we come to the very end of our night, let it rest with you gently, all of it. The bright town in its golden years, the ordinary people and their ordinary precious days, the one terrible morning, so long ago and so long over, the long sleep beneath the ash, the waking and the wonder and the remembering, and the quiet town tonight, found again, cared for, at peace. Chapter 16. The Town Tonight. So let's end where we began, on that beautiful coast, in the warm southern night, only now we know the town that sleeps there, and we can look on it with gentle, knowing eyes, and let it carry us down into rest. Picture it now, tonight, as you lie here. The Bay of Naples, dark and calm, the Mediterranean breathing softly against the shore, the way it has for all the ages. The warm night air, the stars overhead. And there, on its low rise above the plain, the excavated town of Pompeii. Quiet now in the dark, its ancient streets empty, its old stones cool. The long day's visitors all gone home, the whole town left to the night and the silence. The painted walls resting in their dim rooms, the forum open and still under the stars. The amphitheatre a great dark oval, silent where the crowds once roared. The gardens closed and quiet. The streets, with their worn paving and their stepping stones, running empty through the sleeping town, going nowhere now but into the gentle dark. It is a peaceful thing to imagine, the old town at night, with no one there, simply resting under the stars. The same stars, more or less, that the Pompeians saw, wheeling slowly overhead as they have for all the long ages, over the same bay, the same coast, the same green mountain, the warm Mediterranean night, soft and mild, the air still holding the day's warmth, scented faintly with the sea and the dry grass and the flowers of the replanted gardens. The faint sound of the distant sea, and perhaps an owl, and the small night sounds of a quiet place. And all through the dark town, the long, deep, gentle peace of a place where the whole story has been told, where nothing remains to be feared or grieved, where the stones simply rest, and the night simply passes, and the morning will simply come, as it has come over this coast countless thousands of times, soft and golden over the quiet streets, and behind it the mountain, Vesuvius, green and vast, rising into the night, quiet now, sleeping now, as it slept for so long before, as it sleeps again. Watched these days and understood, but for tonight, simply peaceful. A great dark shape against the stars, keeping its long watch over the town it made and unmade and preserved. There is no anger in it tonight. There is nothing to fear from it tonight. It is only a mountain in the dark, sleeping above a sleeping town on a quiet coast, under the wheeling stars, as the warm sea sighs against the shore. How strange and how complete the mountain's part in this story has been. It made the town in the beginning, with the rich soil of its ancient ashes, the fertile earth that drew people to this coast and gave them their prosperity. It ended the town in a single day of fire, taking back everything it had given. And then it kept the town, sealed it and held it safe beneath the ash through all the long centuries, so that it could be found again and known and loved across 2,000 years. Giver, destroyer, and keeper, all three. The one great constant presence over the whole of Pompeii's long story, from before the beginning to beyond the end. And there it still stands tonight, above the quiet, excavated streets, green and patient and at rest, its work long done, holding its peace beneath the stars. And the people of Pompeii, the bakers and the shopkeepers and the gardeners and the children and the lovers who wrote on the walls, are all at rest, and have been at rest for nearly 2,000 years, longer than almost any sorrow the world remembers. The ones who fled lived out their lives and went to their rest in the ordinary way, long, long ago. The ones who stayed have slept beneath their mountain for 20 centuries, found again, remembered, honoured, held with tenderness by all who came after. There is no one suffering in Pompeii tonight. There is no one afraid. There is only the quiet and the memory and the deep, enduring peace of a place whose whole story is told, whose every sorrow is finished, whose people are all, every one of them, finally and forever at rest. So let it all go now. Let the ancient town drift away into the warm dark. Let the mountains sleep. Let the sea sigh against the shore, and the stars wheel slowly overhead. And the quiet streets of Pompeii rest empty and peaceful in the night, as they will rest tomorrow, and the day after, and for as long as the world goes on. You don't have to hold any of it anymore. You don't have to stay awake to keep the story going. The town is safe. Its people are remembered. The whole long tale is told, and it ends, as you are ending your day now, in peace, in stillness, in rest. There is nowhere you need to be tonight, and nothing you need to do. The whole long story is finished. carried all the way from the empty bay before the town, through the founding and the golden years and the ordinary precious days, through the one fateful morning so long ago and so long over, through the long sleep beneath the ash and the wonder of the waking, all the way here to the quiet town resting under the stars, and to you resting too, warm and safe and far from every trouble. You have walked the whole of it. Now you can set it down. Let the people of Pompeii rest, as they have rested for so long. Let the mountain keep its peace, and let yourself sink down gently into your own quiet rest, carried off as softly as the warm night air drifting through the empty streets of the old town by the sea. Sleep well. The town is at peace. Its people are at peace. And so can you be. Good night.